In contemporary studies of the ancient Magian religion, better known as Zoroastrianism, the religion is most often compared to the Abrahamic faiths of the West, and to a secondary degree to the Vedic religion of ancient India, from which it shares elements of cultural descent. Zoroastrianism is often treated as a monotheistic religion that divorced itself from a shared religious culture of the ancient Indo-Aryans that existed across the Iranian plateau eastwards to the Indus and Ganges plains of India. The comparisons between Zoroastrianism and the Abrahamic monotheisms on the one hand and Vedic Brahmanism on the other are important, but there is a third comparison that is often left out or treated as of less direct importance, and this is the relationship between the theology of Zoroastrian religion with those traditions labeled as Gnostic. In the ancient world, the teachings of Zoroaster were treated as being in accord with the philosophies of figures like Plato and Hermes Trismegistus. These classical schools of thought viewed Zoroaster as a link in the same chain of divine transmission as Hermes, Orpheus, the Seven Sages of Greece, and various other near-legendary figures who were believed to have imparted the same knowledge about the divine to different peoples through the ages. Clearly, then, the ancient Greeks did not see Zoroastrianism in the same manner as scholars do today, that is, as an uncompromising monotheism. It has long been understood that many of the concepts found in the writings of various Gnostic sects, whether they be Judeo-Christian like the Valentinians, Sethians, and Kabbalists, or pagan like the Hermetists, had been influenced by the teachings of Zoroaster. But first, what do we mean here by the term Gnosticism? To give a simple answer, Gnosticism is a form of theological mysticism that emphasizes the necessity of a certain form of divinely inspired knowledge, or gnosis, which is required for the individual to achieve an enlightened state of salvation. What makes Gnosticism confusing to so many is that all forms of Gnostic teaching seamlessly blend myth, metaphor, and literalism to a degree that outsiders cannot understand. In trying to interpret Gnostic thought, some scholars, usually those with a sense of admiration for Gnostic teaching, will interpret Gnostic doctrines as purely metaphorical, like a form of classical psychology. But some other scholars will fixatedly emphasize the complex mythological systems of the various Gnostic sects with their abstract entities and long lists of strange-sounding spirits, and portray the whole edifice as something that was taken literally and thus treated as a sign of excessive superstition. The reality is that for Gnostics, there was no separation between the myth and metaphor. It was for them as the Emerald Tablet of Hermes states, as above so below. All the cosmic struggles and all the spiritual entities and divine powers that form the makeup of the universe are in some sense real, but within the human soul the same powers and conflicts play out on a microcosmic scale. So, if we read the myths and theology of Zoroastrianism in this way, we'll find that it bears closer similarities with something like Hermetism rather than the literalist monotheisms of the modern Judeo-Christian faiths. For those unfamiliar with Zoroastrianism, the bulk of this video will provide a brief overview of its theology. The highest deity is the uncreated, purely benevolent, light-exuding creator, Ahura Mazda, whose very name means the wise God. Ahura Mazda, or Ormazd, as the Persians say it, is the principle of all that is good. Opposed to Ahura Mazda is his counterpart, Angra Mainyu, or Ahriman, who is the principle of evil, a being of darkness, destruction, and lies. The two principles, light and darkness, good and evil, truth and lies, wisdom and ignorance, are in a state of perpetual warfare. To this end, Ahura Mazda has created the middle plane, the earth or material world, to serve as their battleground. The war will inevitably be won by the forces of Ahura Mazda, when all of his created souls have chosen goodness and truth over the evil and deceit of Angra Mainyu. Now, if we are looking only at this very broad overview, then the understanding of Zoroastrianism is that it is a cosmogonically dualistic monotheism. However, there is more complexity than this. For example, Ahura Mazda can only very tentatively be said to be the only God. Rather, he is the first and highest principle or chief deity. All other deities are his creation and serve a variety of subsidiary roles. Western texts, largely because of a need to find a relatedness between Zoroastrianism and the Abrahamic religions, will often translate the terms for the lesser divinities with the Western concept of angels. However, this is largely misleading. Now, there are two classes of deities overall. There are the Ahuras, which are seen as the gods worthy of worship, and there are the Daivas, the gods to be rejected. Ahura is related to the Sanskrit term asura, and Daiva to the Sanskrit deva, and in both traditions, the difference between these two sets of deities was initially negligible. However, in later Zoroastrian tradition, the term Ahura became exclusively the term for a benign deity, whereas Daiva came to mean a demon or a devil. In India, it was the opposite. Deva became the general term for a god, while Asura became associated with negative entities or anti-gods. Some scholars speculate that in India, this distinction may have developed in counter-response to the teaching of the Zoroastrians, who condemned the worship of major Hindu deities like Shiva and Indra as the worship of demons. But in the Zoroastrian tradition, the Ahuras can be subdivided into two main groups. The first are the Ameshaspentas, and the second the Yazatas. We are going to be looking very closely at the Ameshaspentas in this video, but to give a rather quick generalization that should explain the difference between these two groups, the Ameshaspentas are essentially emanations of Ahura Mazda himself. That is, they are extensions of his being. On the one hand, they are personifications of his attributes, but on the other hand, this does not mean that the worshipper cannot approach them as distinct beings in and of themselves. The Yazatas are closer to the usual concept of lesser gods or angels, as they are distinct entities in themselves rather than mere personifications of the divine power. They are created to serve the divine will, but at the same time the worshipper could still construe them, if much more loosely, as personifications of natural powers. But first, let us take a closer look at Ahura Mazda and the Ameshaspentas. Now, the name Ahura Mazda is somewhat ambiguous, because it can be interpreted a few different but closely related ways based on its etymology. Ahura can be translated as God, Lord, or Spirit, but keep in mind that when using the translations Lord or Spirit, it is specifically referring to something divine. While Mazda means wisdom or intelligence and shares roots with the English word mind, thus we can translate Ahura Mazda as Wisdom Lord, the Wise Lord or Wise God, or more loosely as the Divine Mind. In the latter case, we can see the similarities with the Hermetic Poimandres or authentic sovereign mind. After Ahura Mazda himself, we have the Ameshaspentas, of which there are, of course, 7. Amesha means immortal, and Spenta can be translated as either holy or bounteous, so they are holy or bounteous immortals. The highest of the Ameshaspentas is Spentamainu, whose name means immortal mind or immortal intellect. So again, very comparable to the Hermetica. Now, he is most overtly an extension of Ahura Mazda, as he is understood to be the creative mode, as it were, of Ahura Mazda. And he is directly opposed by Angra Mainyu, whose name is probably best translatable as the destructive intellect, though it's usually translated as the destructive spirit. And this is why Ahura Mazda will win the cosmic war in the end, because he does not himself have a direct negative counterpart, because Angra Mainyu is rather the counterpart of his highest aspect, the Spenta Mainyu, the creative mind, which is by nature opposed by the destructive mind. The next Ameshaspenta in the hierarchy is Vohumana. Mana is from the same root as the words Mainyu and Mazda, and thus can also be translated as mind, but in this case with the nuance of purpose or intention, so it is more what one sets one's mind toward. Vohu means good, hence he is the good mind or good purpose. Now the name pretty much shows that he is really not that distinct from Ahura Mazda or Spentamainu. The concept of Vohumana is essentially to describe a subcategory of creation as represented by Spentamainu. Hence, Ahura Mazda is pure divine being. Spentamainu is his capacity for higher creation, like souls and spirits in the human archetype, while Vohumana is more associated with the creation of other benevolent animal life forms like cattle. His opposite is the spirit Akamana, the evil mind or wicked purpose. This entity leads mortals to commit selfish or deceitful actions and is also supposed to be the creator of the Daivas, who mislead humans into false acts of worship. The third Amesha Spenta is Asha Vahishta, meaning the best truth. The term Asha is the Avestan form of the word that appears in Old Persian as Arta and Sanskrit as Rita, all of which can be translated as order, rightness, or truth. Asha is the inherent truth of reality as embedded in the very being of Ahura Mazda. It is this principle which imposes order on the world. It is also the principle within mankind that leads humans to perform good deeds. The fourth of the Ameshaspentas is Kshatravarya, meaning desirable dominion, but usually just referred to as Kshatra. This is an emanation of Vahumana and imports to mortals the principle of good thoughts. The fifth is Spenta Armaiti, or holy devotion. Armaiti is a much more distinct character, as she is specified as female and the daughter of Ahura Mazda. Spenta Armaiti serves the role of a mother goddess figure within Zoroastrian literature and is similar to the Western concept of Mother Nature. She is also closely assimilated to the figure of Zam, or Earth, and is thus sometimes called Zam Armaiti. The sixth is Harvatat, meaning wholeness or perfection. The term Harvatat is grammatically feminine, yet the figure is considered male. Harvatat is associated with the power of water as well as prosperity and wealth. Plutarch considered Harvatat to be the Persian equivalent of the Greek Plutus, god of wealth. The seventh is Ameritat, immortality, and she is paired with Harvatat. Harvatat is associated with drink, while Ameritat is associated with food. Hence, their demonic counterparts are thirst and hunger, respectively. Wholeness and immortality are also considered to be the rewards of the souls of the faithful after death. Now, the entities known as Yazatas, or Yazd in Persian, are sometimes equated to the Western concept of angels, but are really deities in their own right. Most are the remnants of ancient Indo-Aryan deities from before the development of Zoroastrianism, and equivalents can be found in the related Armenian, Scythian, and Vedic cultures. Yazda comes from a root that means worthy of worship, and is related to the Greek word hagios, meaning holy. The term was originally a synonym for Ahura, and thus was used for Ahura Mazda himself and the Ameshaspentas. But in time it came mostly to describe other benevolent deities apart from these highest powers. The list of Yazdas includes traditional Iranian deities, elemental forces, and personifications of divine aspects of Ahura Mazda that for whatever reason were not included amongst the Ameshaspentas. Probably because the Magian priests liked the idea of there being 7 Ameshaspentas to fit nicely with that most sacred number. Thus, among the Yazdas is Mithra, a solar deity and god of contracts. Mithra is so popular among Indo-Aryan peoples that he is one of the few deities to retain his high position in Iranian cultures after the transition from early Brahmanism to Zoroastrian Magianism. Thus, he was widely worshipped among Vedic Hindus and Zoroastrians alike, and eventually adopted by the Romans, who carried his worship to the west. There is Anahita, a popular goddess among the Iranian peoples who is associated with water and is equated variously with Ishtar, Aphrodite, and Artemis. This goddess was originally the personification of the heavenly river which flows down upon the earth, and is also the Iranian version of the major Hindu goddess Sarasvati, and pronounced Harahwati in the Iranian dialects. Next, we have Verathragna, personification of victory and god of war. His name later morphed into Bahram, Warahram, and Vahram in later languages. Initially, he was considered a subordinate deity to the Ameshaspenta Ashavahishta, but was later considered to be one of the Ameshaspentas himself, where he is considered to be one of the primary opponents of the devil figure Angra Mainyu. Tishtria, or Tyr, a god of rain and wisdom. equated to both the Greek deities Apollo and Hermes. His holy day is the summer solstice, known in Persian as Tirgan. Sraosha, god of conscience or religious observance. He protects the Chinvat bridge that separates the realm of the living from that of the dead, but only the righteous may cross. Sraosha is considered the Zoroastrian equivalent of Gabriel in the Abrahamic angelology. And then there is Rashnu, god of justice. Rashnu is a companion of Mithra and Sraosha, who together are the three judges of the souls of the dead. There is also the archaic figure Apam-Napat, child of the waters, whose name seems to have been retained amongst the Zoroastrians because of its traditional sacredness. His original role was that of a creator god, especially of mankind, and he is closely associated with Mithra. The name Apam-Napat appears in Sanskrit literature as a title of Varuna, the archaic sky father and creator, who later was reduced to being an obscure sea god. Apam-Napat should have been understood as another name for Ahura Mazda, but his role in the traditional hierarchy was taken over by Spenta Mainyu, just like Varuna's role was taken by Brahma, or Indra, or Vishnu. Each of the Amesha Spentas is accompanied by 3 or 4 Yazatas known as Hamkars, or collaborators. Whether or not these are supposed to be emanations of these Ameshas, or just spirits who carry out their will, is unclear. Many of these Hamkars are definitely personifications of abstract concepts and celestial objects. The Hamkars of Spentamaynu are Daipadar, Daipmeher, and Daipdin, giver of fire, giver of friendship, and giver of religion, respectively. The Hamkars of Ohumana are Ma, Geyush-Urvan, and Raman. Ma is the moon, Geyush-Urvan is the soul of the primordial cow, and Raman, or Ram, is joy. The collaborators of Asha-Vahishta are Atar, fire, Sraosha, meaning consciousness or observation, and Varthragna, the god of victory. Kshatravarya's collaborators are Hwar, or Kwarana, meaning glory or splendor, Mithra, god of covenants and contracts, Asman, the highest heaven, and Anagram Raucha, endless light. Spenta Armaiti has Ap, water, Daina, conscience or religion, Ashi, reward or attainment, and Mantra Spenta, holy prayer. For Haurvatat, the collaborators are Tishtria, god of rain, inundation, and fertility, Fravashi, spirit, and Vata, wind. And the Hamkars of Amaratat are Rashnu, who is one of the 3 judges of the afterlife and the upholder of truth, Ashtat, justice, rectitude, or honesty, and Zamyad, the earth. What we can observe in all this is that the Zoroastrian religion did not just influence Judaism and Christianity as we know them today, but when we look at it through a Gnostic lens, we see how closely it parallels and lends concepts to the esoteric sides of these religions, such as the Sethians, Valentinians, and the Kabbalists, but also to the pagan mysteries of Hermetism and Neoplatonism. What we know about the Gnostics is that there was never a clear separation between whether the various divine entities were supposed to be conceived of as individual powers somewhere out there in the universe, or as personifications of inborn human traits, mostly of a psychological nature. And I think this is very much the point. The underlying theme of all Gnosticism is that there is no separation or division in reality between the human soul and the cosmos. This is the macrocosm-microcosm idea. If so with man, then so with the universe. Zoroastrianism is far older than the other religious groups that we label as Gnostic, and all the later groups, whether they be Hermetists or Sethians or Valentinian Christians, hold strong regard for Zoroastrian doctrine and saw in Zoroaster an early predecessor of their own movements. In Poimandres, the authentic or sovereign mind is not only God, the creator of the universe and the essence of light and life, but is also the individual mind of the text's author, That is to say, that the mind of every individual person is but a fragment of the one first and ultimate divine mind, with no separation. Rather, there is only the illusion of separation due to ignorance. This is a monistic view, but not one that denies that created beings, whether gods or men, are without the semblance of individuality. Rather, it is that all things share in an innate divinity which is conscious, active, and always generating, but never separate from what it generates. If you reach out to good mind, you are not only reaching out to some entity called good mind, who is an emanation of the Supreme Godhead, but you are also cultivating your own good mind, which is both a reflection of the deity and the gateway to it. It is through cultivating the best traits of ourselves, traits like good purpose, truthfulness, good thoughts, wholeness, that we are able to reach out to their divine archetypes, who are not merely personifications of benevolent traits, but are the actual living fountainheads of those traits that exist within all. Now, if I'm not being clear, I'm not saying, as in Jungian psychology, that the gods and powers are just projections from your psyche being projected onto the world as gods, but rather the opposite, that the gods and powers really do exist out there in the ether as emanations and generations of a divine mind we choose to call God, but also that each of us, and even each of the gods, exists as a microcosm bearing all these traits within themselves. We are not merely copies, but extensions of one divine power. Thus, if I cultivate good intention in myself, over time my good thoughts reconnect to the divine power from which they are an emanation, and my intentions become a manifestation of that universal being, Vahumana, who is the origin and ultimate good intention. And the same is true of all the other divine powers, for there is no true separation, only the semblance of separation. In this way, one can achieve the state of spiritual enlightenment, where one fully recognizes and manifests the oneness of all being, and yet accepts the apparent separateness as the natural result of continuous emanationism. Therefore, as much as certain demons or evil spirits might be equated with the opposites of these divine powers, the point in Zoroastrianism, I think, is not to blame outside entities, but rather such traits as evil conscience, lies, and ignorance are the result of turning away from a path towards God, that is, oneness with the all and source of being, and mistaking our own inborn traits as unique, individual, and separate in themselves, as though each of us lived as if no one else had good intention or truthfulness or good thoughts. Hence, we create for ourselves the sensation of absolute separateness, and feeling separate and alone produces for us our own hell. Thanks to everyone for watching. I know that maybe I got a little wordy at parts, but I hope my intention was clear that the powers are real beings outside of us, but also reflections of those powers that reside in us, and that spiritual enlightenment is a recognition of this oneness or wholeness despite the seeming dichotomy. I felt Zoroastrianism was one of the best examples to express this, not only because it's one of the oldest religions in the world, but also because when you look at the literal meanings of the names of the various divine powers, it becomes fairly obvious that we're not just dealing with some mythology of the local gods here, but of something deeper that bridges the gap between psychology and spirituality. Once again, thanks for watching. If you like my content, please like and subscribe. Once again, thanks for watching. If you like my content, please like and subscribe.